This legislation is necessary to update our laws around veterinary practices and to meet our obligations under several EU directives, including the Nitrates Directive. It provides for the introduction of regulations and monitoring mechanisms regarding veterinary prescriptions and their dispensing and the importation, sale and use of fertiliser, as well as the creation of a national fertiliser database. I think it's a long time coming. I remember being in a knowledge transfer group long before I went into politics when vets were explaining about the overuse of antibiotics and the routine dosing. Stakeholders recognise the need for regulation in these areas, but there are also concerns that the bill has too many ambiguities and will result in even more bureaucracy for ordinary farmers. Although this legislation is technical in nature, it still touches on many aspects of farming and rural life. It's about our use of fertiliser, our vulnerability to international markets, and the glaring need to accelerate the use of viable and sustainable alternatives. This legislation is also about veterinary practice in Ireland, the challenges faced by vets and how we respond to antimicrobial resistance. The agri-food sector is a significant part of the Irish economy, and livestock farming is the largest component at around 85%. This bill will therefore have a significant impact on the sector and the everyday practices of farmers. There is scope to improve this bill and make it more effective. It needs to be targeted at supporting family farms and ensuring its obligations can be met easily by people who are already overstretched. I'd encourage the Minister to listen to the points being raised and continue his engagement with stakeholders to strengthen your approach. The pre-legislative scrutiny process clearly establishes that farming representative bodies are more than willing to work with you and have themselves suggested practical solutions to some of the issues that were identified. The veterinary medical products, or VMP, aspect of the bill highlight the many challenges faced by both farmers and vets in their attempts to ensure the health of livestock and act responsibly in the administration of animal-based medication. European VMP regulations are aimed at enhancing safety and availability of veterinary medicinal products and strengthening the EU response to fight antimicrobial resistance. An effective and coordinated approach to combating antimicrobial resistance is incredibly important. It's a major threat to both human and animal health. Unfortunately, it's a leading cause of death globally, especially impacting people in less advantaged countries. The inappropriate and overuse of antibiotics greatly increases the risk of disease spread, severe illness and mortality. Also, this resistance can be transferred between disease, causing microorganisms that infect humans and animals and can live on in the environment. The Minister will also be aware of potential problems raised by the Irish Pharmacy Union, who argue that the bill may actually reduce compliance around antimicrobial resistance. Recommendation number 6 from the Agriculture Committee report is the separation of prescribing and dispensing of veterinary medicines. It's pointed out that this approach adopted in Scandinavian countries has achieved significantly lower levels of resistance to medicines. However, in response, the Department has said it cannot pursue this approach as it would be seen as providing state aid to one sector, as the separation of prescribing and dispensing is found in other EU countries. This rationale can be disputed. The committee called for this proposal to be examined extensively. Can the Minister confirm if a fresh extensive examination occurred in response to that call? And if so, what format did it take, and can he make the results available? The VMP regulations need more work. They are part of our response to a very significant issue. It's up to the Minister to use the scope available to implement the regulations in a manner that helps farmers and vets. There is a ban on the use of antimicrobials as a prophylactic. That is a preventative measure, and restrictions on metaphylactic use. That the administration of a medical product to a whole group of animals when only some of that group have been diagnosed with a clinical disease. This latter practice is so common in dairy settings regarding mastitis control. The restriction on the metaphylactic use of antimicrobials makes farm hygiene and approaches to managing infection rates even more significant. We all know that there are farms which are not meeting these standards, and there is a resultant over-reliance on antimicrobials. Minister, with these new regulations, you now have a responsibility and an opportunity to really help as many farms as possible become compliant with best practice in this area. A related area highlighted in the pre-legislative scrutiny was the national capacity to monitor these issues. Mocker and Affirma pointed out the need for proper funding of forage and laboratory analysis. There will be increased demand for a range of tests, and the state will need to be ready for this. New regulations which put more pressures on family farms must be counterbalanced by the department having appropriate facilities. These regulations also cover the supply of antiparasitic veterinary medicine products in particular, with the change of products from being merchant products to becoming prescription-only medicines. The Agriculture Committee's report, reflecting the inputs of stakeholders, expressed considerable concern at these changes. These range from reduced choice and increased cost to farmers to the impacts of restricting or ceasing the role of the responsible person in relation to the supply of medicines. The Minister will be aware that this was a substantial item of discussion with the committee, and the farming organisations have very genuine and practical points which need to be addressed, and I hope that you'll consider in the later stages of the bill those points. A benefit of this legislation is it has allowed a discussion of the role of vets have in our agri-food system and the pressures that they face. In their submission to the committee, Veterinary Ireland, the representative body for nearly 1,000 private veterinary practitioners, point out the significant burdens they have in providing 24-hour care for animals. This includes the cost of operating this model, the disruption of work-life balance, and the challenges in recruiting and retaining veterinary staff. These are matters that the Minister needs to be conscious of, not only in relation to this bill, but ensuring we have sufficient vets in all areas across the country to support family farming. I think everybody who's involved in farming really appreciates that we have such an incredible veterinary service, and that way it needs to be protected. The regulation around fertiliser is another crucially important development, but it needs to be designed and implemented with farmers and agricultural organisations to ensure its actual effectiveness. Already from the pre-legislative scrutiny, there are worries about additional bureaucracy. The National Fertiliser Database is intended to be a tool to help the Nitrates Action Programme. We know that agriculture is the single biggest source of water pollution in Ireland, and we all want to address this. The proposed database is intended to provide a better understanding of current fertiliser use, but would also facilitate the National Agriculture Inspection Programme and chemical fertiliser control. Crucially, measures to improve best practice and begin to turn the tide on our shocking levels of water pollution and soil degradation are necessary. But Minister, we need to do this in a way that encourages compliance. There were numerous practical issues and uncertainties raised by stakeholders in the pre-legislative scrutiny, and it's important to acknowledge that you have made changes in the bill to reflect some of these, but there are some outstanding matters. One of the primary concerns was that the database could increase administrative burden to fertiliser users, and the committee called for a design that was accessible and user-friendly. The department has clarified that the system will use the existing portal agfood.ie, and farmers can use their herd number. The committee recommended that there is a continuous engagement between the department as the database is rolled out. This is the very least that we can expect to help make the process as easy and as efficient as possible. Another matter was the situation where sports clubs may use fertiliser on their grounds. The department has clarified that these clubs will be required to register as professional fertiliser users. This begs the question, do they know that? Many farmers will be aware of these impending changes, but sports clubs may not. So I'm wondering what steps you're taking to inform and educate all relevant farmers, sports clubs and other fertiliser users. There's an obligation on the government to be proactive in helping all stakeholders understand the changes and support them in adhering to the new regulations. The regulation of fertilisers is an opportunity for us to think about our reliance on industrial imported chemical fertilisers. This time last year, farmers were facing inconsistent price increases with international restrictions on nitrates, and that was even before the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There is an urgent need to end our dependence on chemical fertiliser. It represents the type of intensive farming that is forcing farmers to do more and more for less and less. Sustainable agriculture needs to mean practices that could be maintained using natural approaches, that use the strengths of our soil and climate rather than working against them and leaving farmers reliant on these imported elements that we can't control the price of. If we don't truly try and address this now, which I don't believe we are, we're blatantly leaving it for the next generation. I don't mean just the next generation of politicians to do it, but for the next generations of farmers too. And the longer we leave it, the harder I believe it will get. I don't think that we've actually grasped how important this issue is, and I think the kind of relatively empty chamber compared to other issues is kind of evidence of that. But there's also, you don't have to look very far for more evidence of it. There's the absence of a nutrient management plan, which Macro and Firma have been calling for. There's the very existence of the derogation for nitrates and the kind of continuous glossing over, ignoring of that in this chamber because nobody wants to really address it. And I just think it's worth noting that a lot more needs to be done on this, and I don't think that this government is really working towards that. And like I said, the longer that is left, the harder it will actually be for farms, so it's not doing them any favours. While the introduction of new regulations necessarily involves disruption and a new way of doing things, I can only hope that the government will work with all of the stakeholders to make this a really smooth process. These regulations are in response to real issues around antimicrobial resistance and water pollution. It's fair to say that we're all invested in addressing these matters. The challenge is how we do it. There are some outstanding shortcomings which can be resolved. If the bill moves through the next stages, I encourage you to return to the committee's report and to further engage with stakeholders to improve the effectiveness of this legislation.
Deputy Jennifer Murnane O'Connor.